Hi, folks. Um, I'm Murilo. I've been in the game industry for a decade or a little bit more right now. I started my career at Riot Games, moving into Garena, which is, I think, today one of the biggest mobile publishers and game devs out there. And I came to Vancouver to work at Phoenix Labs for a couple of years, releasing games that are definitely not tied to esports, because all my career before that were in esports and game dev and the mix and the Venn diagram that connects all the things. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about that on this keynote. How do we create, as game devs, environments that let the community build an esports scene? And why I'm talking about letting the community build a sports scene? Because it's a misconception for a lot of game devs that are trying to enter in the esports space that you can build an esports game. That you can do a lot of the things that create a foundation for an esports game. But to build an esports scene, you need a community that's going to support that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Please. All right, so when I talk about esports, these are kind of the things that we think about, right? Like I see in panels today, I see in the conversations, like big events, like everyone talking about big events are what are recognized as esports, of course. Like those are all big events that I was an executive producer on, international events, local events, and etc. They were huge. They were some of the things that drive more of how the industry connect with non-endemic partners. Like events like this move millions and millions of dollars in revenue for the cities they are, in connecting with vendors that are definitely non-endemic, from television to guys that print banners and never had touched anything that is digital. But those are definitely not what esports is about. That's a big part of this pyramid that I'm going to talk a little bit more. And although we all, as part of an esports industry, strive to get there, there's a lot of work for a game to be able to host an event like this on an ecosystem that is healthy and is a long-term format. Slide, please. So what really powers esports? Events, super cool. Like it's nothing like being in an arena and seeing thousands of people screaming and having that feeling that the game is something that they can touch. Like that, there's nothing like that. There's really nothing like that. You can play at your home, you can watch a stream, but being there is something that is very unique to esports and drives so much connection to the brand, to the game, to the ecosystem that keeps people coming back. But there is one reason why they went there, and it's not because they already knew that. That's the thing that they're going to experience when they are there. So what makes them go there is what really powers esports. So this ugly slide like here, all the pretty pictures are gone, and now we get to the boring slides. It's what is the foundation of this sport? So the first thing is, for a game dev, where you have to spend a lot of time and effort, and that's your true goal. If you want to have a game that is competitive, there's a lot of this layer, this is the foundation of your game, is competitiveness. So, and that comes not only with systems that enable players to play on a competitive way. There might be ladders, so they are competing not against each other directly on a PvP sense, but competing against each other outside of the game, so seeing scores and etc., who gets to level 100 first, things like that. They're not necessarily the pure PvP, I gonna defeat this opponent way, but systems like that is what supports. And they are the core of any competitive pyramid, because without a game that is truly competitive, it's balanced. Players understand, and they get defeated and they understand why they got defeated. So they learn and they go back and they get better. So without those tools, without that effort that as a game dev, you're the only one that can put on the game, it's very hard to continue building the pyramid, because at the end of the day, it's hard to create something that people keep coming back to spend their time and effort trying to get better if they don't know how to get better. So this is a layer that without deep investment from the game dev team, it's very hard to create a long-lasting esports scene unless, and I'm going to talk a lot about this, there's a strong community that's going to make it, no matter what the game dev team thinks, a esports scene happen. Smash. So that's definitely outliers. I'm not going to say this is a silver bullet. This is a framework that you can apply to anything. But community, which is the second layer, is what drives the growth. So once you have established that, your game is a competitive game that has tools for folks to understand and get better and continue growing, continue grinding to that level of achievement that you're now great, you're one of the best players, you feel rewarded by the time you invest, then you start moving to giving power to your community. You create tools, you invest into not only anymore having a space for players to play, but how can I empower the players that are not necessarily inside my game at that moment to organize their own tournaments, to be able to connect with the game through APIs and understand and investigate what a good game looks like, what a good experience looks like. So all of those tools is what starts to create a community. So, one example of this is back in the day when Riot created Riot API, one of the first things that we were discussing as an org was how can we guarantee that tournament organizers can organize an event and have a lobby with 10 players. Like, imagine trying to host an event that you cannot even put everyone on the same room without like random luck. That's a system that is intentional. If you don't provide those tools, it's so much harder for a game to be able to host everyone on the same room and having this competitiveness. It takes hours on some more underdeveloped games into these areas to make a tournament happen than a game that properly support that. So this creates chaos. This starts to create that fandom, that social tissue that communities have. Like, you know who are the organizers. You know what they win their tournaments, what are the rewards. All of those things start to get more part of the game on a day-to-day, and it's creating this foundation for the second layer. So the layer above. Once you have an organized play space, there's tournaments are happening, you are providing, you have an open communication with your community, there's intent on making that grow, then you start talking about professional play. Then you start creating this path to professional. This is where I saw many folks talking today about, it's like, we are missing a layer to connect like the very grassroots experiences to professional player. And this is what I think the aspirational layer is today the most challenging one to develop. A lot of big games are trying and failing because either go full control or going to have this semi-pro league that is funded and have all this talent playing there and etc. So that's a lot of effort and money involved. Or are going to leave the community to get there without many support, so that we are still not in the industry finding a proper way, many success cases of this. But the aspirational layer is a clear path. So now that I'm playing constantly championships, tournaments that are community, I want to start playing official ones. So those are official tournaments. There are tournaments that are hosted by the publisher or in partnership and supported by the publisher. And those tournaments, they are the ones that are scouted, the players that win have access to the professional teams and etc. There's a lot of effort that goes under it, and that's not necessarily on the dev layer anymore. This is the dev layer, I mean, the team that is properly making the game. So that's not necessarily on the dev layer anymore to make this a success. There's plenty of work on the dev layer, but to get there, it's a lot of relationships and partnerships and creating connections. So that's, as a dev organization, is what you're starting to do to bridge the gap between the grassroots and getting to the professional level. And then after you have this path to pro defined, how do you get there from playing organized tournaments at collegiate and etc. to getting access to profession, then you finally get to the top of the pyramid. That's the professional esports scenario. So the professional esports scenarios, when we're seeing the big events and etc., they are really the top of this. They don't start. If you want to build an ecosystem that is long-lasting, if you want to build an ecosystem that is going to thrive by itself and not only a marketing campaign, you have to have all these foundations. Otherwise, you're going to have a cool event. You can have an event as big as World Finals for League of Legends. You can put the money and make it happen. You can find people that want to watch that. Is this going to last is the question. So how do we build something that lasts? So once again, why people go to that event is because they love the game, they love the competitiveness, and they want to continue to experience that. So to build this ecosystem is not only getting the cool events out there, they are extremely important. That's where you attract the non-endemic folks, and they look and it's like, oh, this is really a thing. I didn't imagine so many people would want to watch games. I heard this so many times for government folks, just like entering an arena, like, that's a lot of people here chanting and cheering and etc. And they get very impressed. So they are very important for legitimacy of the esports scenario as something that moves as an industry, but they are the pinnacle. They should not be your aim when you're starting. As a game dev, if you want to get there, build a foundation. When you build a foundation, expand, create tools for your community. Once your community is thriving and there's a lot of interest, then you start moving to this professional space. When we're talking about professional space, we're talking about people that are living your game. They're making money. That's a profession. If you want to do that, you have to be responsible. And to create that scenario cannot be just, this is a marketing thing that I'm going to do this year, and maybe I don't have the marketing budget for next year. Therefore, drop all of your thing. Come work on my esports scenario, and then next year there's no esports scenario anymore. That's not fair. And once you do that once, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, well, many people don't want to go and try again to bet on those titles, on those companies, because they already did once. Like, they tried to create an esports scene as a very much marketing-oriented focus, and they drop it. So, next slide, please. So, how can dev teams enhance this ecosystem? This is an ecosystem. So, I divided this in 4 different layers. There's many ways of approaching this, but how can a dev team, so a team that's connected to the game, assets and code and etc., support this? Next slide, please. All right, so on the bottom of the pyramid, first, so organized play and competitive, first thing you have to do, and I will not be able to stress this enough, tools. The best thing you can do as a dev team is develop tools that are going to enhance the probability of your game to have that higher competitiveness. So not only tools that let players play against each other, as I mentioned, but tools that let tournament organize your games successfully, tools that let players learn how to be better, tools that let even small things, which are not small at all for us that work in this esports scenario, like spectate, a camera that you can control, easy way of swapping between players in the map, like things like that. They don't come from free on game dev. If anyone thinks that comes from free, it doesn't. It's actually, camera is one of the things that are the hardest part to make it right. But you have to do it. Like, tools are the way that you support your community with your game. Without tooling, very hard for folks to thrive. Your game can be thriving, but your community is struggling, so it's not necessarily the way. Second thing, community resources and programs. So you're getting people interested in making your game grow as a competitiveness. Many folks talked here about like how Riot did well with structure and frameworks for if you want to host a tournament of this title, these are the rules, this is the format, these are the resources. That's clearly something that any game team can do. So what are the things that you that want to organize a tournament for this game has to comply to, but also here are the things that you get by complying to. So collaborate with your community, have a strong community program that is going to help developers, tournament organizers, get connect to your developers and grow together. This is extremely important. I cannot stress enough how much I saw small TOs growing into owners of arenas in Brazil by having access to those things and just consistently doing better. Like, knowledge is power, and it's corny to say, but it's truly for a lot of these folks that all that they don't have as a game dev, give them to that. They will thrive if they have access to how your game works and the things that are important for them also be heard and developing in collaboration. And finally, one thing that's in your hands as a game dev, rewards. Like incentives and rewards for tournaments, especially when you're starting, it's something that is fairly often overlooked. I think because, once again, on the game development, having a key for a cosmetic is not something that comes from free. That those systems don't exist. You have to prioritize them. You have to develop. There are months of development to get there. But giving the ability to have rewards to tournament organizers is something that really can make or break a scenario. And many folks are unable to continue creating tournaments without proper support from the devs. So as a dev, invest something on that, because that's truly going to make your community be able to thrive. Of course, by giving rewards, and when I talk about rewards, usually things that are monetized in the games, there's a lot of other systems that have to come with this. There's like, how do you prevent exploits of folks that are hosting fake tournaments just to farm rewards and etc. So all of that comes with it. So a lot of folks that want to enter in the space take a lot of time to get this right. This is definitely a risk when you start to give monetized stuff for free. But it's an important thing that's worth doing. It's super worth doing. So those three things, of course, not exhaustive at all. Three things that are super important to, as a dev team, to help with the base of the pyramid. Next slide, please. But what about the top? The top is very different. As a dev team, purely as a dev team, there's things you can do for sure, but many things are out of your hands already. First one, esports has to be a core part of your business plan. If you want to get into the professional level, if you want to create this layer that has aspirational and the top layer, you have to start looking at this as a part of your business. You're not only a game dev anymore. Esports is a core part of your business. It has its own strategy. It has its own budget. It's not only a marketing thing anymore. It has to be part of the core business of your game team. Riot, extremely successful with their export scenario, because this is true. Like, it's a whole team that's funded by their own, with their goals, the core, capabilities, and a lot of collaboration between the dev team and the esports team, which comes to the second topic here. Collaborative culture across the board. So you have your dev team now having to talk with the esports team. It's different goals. So friction, tension, something I do here in the tournament might impact the game, something I do in the game might impact the tournament. But you also have one more layer that you can collaborate with now. You have professional players, you have professional teams. Those folks are most likely better at your game and understand better the impact of change than most of your designers. Like, you get some folks to the level of, you change champion using League, but you change an item on the game, it does impact completely the ecosystem on the professional level. And sometimes you have to change anyway. So you have to listen, but you should never focus your game on just 0.1% of players. You have to listen, you have to collaborate with them. But you should not design your game only for them. Because once again, the game that's thriving is a game that has an esports scene. If your base of your pyramid start crumbling down because you're only focused on the top of your pyramid, that's a point of failure. And the last point, partners. That's where most of the power of organization, a dev company that's now also esports, it's the core of their business, is looking at, is building the partnerships. As a big brand, you now, the hosting big sports events, you can't create connections with the government. They will listen to you more than they're gonna listen to a small player in the market. But you have to bridge this gap. Like, it's about multiplying forces, it's about collaboration across the board, but you are the only one that holds the IP and can get there and open the doors for the esports scenario to depend less on you. Less and less is the goal, and you want to own a core piece of your sports scenario as a game dev for sure, but you also create so many open doors for the esports scenario to thrive, for your teams to have sponsorships, for your athletes to have recognition when they have to travel abroad and get a visa as an athlete. So all of those things is on the hands of a dev team when they start getting on this part of the pyramid. And that's why it's so important to have a dedicated team to that, because if you're treating this as like a marketing budget, those things often don't come because they are drinking from the marketing budget, but you don't have a long vision. Like, your vision is a short-term vision. So if you have a short-term vision about this one event you're dropping, why you're investing in legitimacy or getting visas, being recognized as athletes, and not just like a guy that's visiting from this other country and never going to enter because he has 14 years old and it's not going to enter your country. And so all those things impact on a global scale, but that's when you're talking about that level of professional is already where you are. Like, it's very big and broad and etc. As a final statement on this is, trying to design games to be esports is such a risk that I personally don't believe we ever should do. You should design a game to be a great game. And if you want your game to be competitive, a great competitive experience. And from that, you start collaborating and you start building this pyramid. You have strong foundation of a strong community, empower this community, see where this goes, and build with your community from that to the professional level, and not try to go straight to the professional level unless it's your marketing strategy. And if it's your marketing strategy, that's fine. That's also fine. But you know, that's a marketing strategy, that's not an ecosystem. If an ecosystem has to be built bottom up with a vision from top down. Okay, thanks.
Okay, everyone, thank you for coming out to our 5th industry session panel. Once again, we're discussing designing for competition, esports for game developers. And with me today are Mr. Murilo Lorenzo and Mr. George Rogers. I'll give them a quick chance to introduce themselves real quick.
Oh, well, how's that? Great. I'm George Rogers. I'm the community director for Aether Studios, and we're a small studio that started about 10 years ago with a really small team, like 3 to 4 people, and now we're middle size. We're like 40 people, and we're actually one of the games that are downstairs, one of the main events. So we've always come in as like from a grassroots perspective on building esports. It's been a core part of our game. So I just love to talk about that, and I'm happy to share some on that today.
Hi, you never heard my name? Well, I just spoke half an hour, I think, 20 minutes about all of this. So I'm Murilo. I've been in the esports industry and the gaming industry for a little bit about more a decade now. I worked at Riot, I worked at Garena, I worked at Phoenix Labs, different focuses, different games. And I'm very passionate about esports. That was one of the things that drove me to the gaming industry, was getting into an arena and seeing everything shake when we were all just going nuts. So yeah, that's how I came to be part of the esports industry.
All right, thanks for your excellent introduction. And now we're going to move on to the question panels. So here's my first question for the two of you. How does the game development and esports industries interact, and how do you think that affects the actual process of game development?
Yeah, so there's a lot of similarities and differences. I think, as Rilla said, like, you don't want to ever start at the top there because you can't like build it and assume they will come. You have to have a core as a developer. You have to have a good core gameplay loop first, right? You're not designing the sport from the top So it depends on the level, I suppose, but a lot of things kind of have similarities in the production process, and that they're these large creative endeavors, and it's not something that I guess can be a marketing side, as you said, but I think if you're doing it right, it's like a whole other part of your studio that even if you're starting small, it's got to have the same amount of like respect and core pieces as like production for the game. There's all this creative that goes with it. There's all this these events and overhead and stuff like that. So
Yeah, for sure. I think plus one on all of that. There's definitely a relationship between you cannot play the game without the game developer. So to be a esport, there's already a connection there, right? Like if the game goes offline, if for some reason Valve decides there's no more CS:GO tomorrow, well, there's no more CS:GO scenario as well. So that's part of the relationship, but that's not the full extent of it. There's also part of, as I mentioned, creating this community that can run a sports scenario, that can thrive. And also part of that is how much do you want to own the core experience of your game? Like it's your IP. There's a level of protection you have to have, otherwise you completely lose control of what's going on with your own game. But also there's a part that you might just strategically want to keep so you can promote those partnerships and etc. So there's plenty. There's some cannibalization for sure, but there's no way of having a sports scene without the game dev connected to it for sure. And that's so many things that one can help the other. Even when you're part of the same org, that it's very easy to overlook these relationships.
Yeah, for sure. I think esports is definitely, as you said, one of those things that is really focused on nowadays in game development, but might not be that first step you want to take when creating a new ecosystem without that foundation, as well as you mentioned as well, George, just that very foundational base of the game. Will this get people interested to compete? I think is really important. So I'm going to move on to the next question, if that's all right. To what extent do you think esport is part of the game development discussion on a base level? When proposing a game concept, for example, how involved do you think esports is in the current sphere?
I think nowadays, if you have a competitive game, especially as we're seeing in the industry right now, like a lot of folks trying to get to the live ops space, so free-to-play games with live service and etc., and not having the bulk of players that's necessary for the game to thrive. So very core part of your development is having a strong community. So you have to have community management and all this practice as part of your core game loop, develop games with the community, and that's also from where sports scenes can thrive. So having that early into your process just make your game better because you're literally talking with your audience and can make the competitiveness aspects already prepare to move into the scenarios. We're seeing games that are still in early access and there's streamers hosting tournaments. Like there's no tools at all. There's mostly a streamer looking at their own screen or someone else is sharing screen or using like third-party softwares and etc. But they're already happening. So the seed is there. It's up to you to help you grow.
Yeah, I think even if you're like a really small dev that hasn't put your first title out, or you're gonna bring it to events or show it off to people at like a little table, even like the games. I'm assuming if you're thinking about esports, it has some competitive aspect, so that just gets people really excited, and I think it's great at all those levels, because even saying like, hey, instead of hey, play our game. Try like a demo. Say, hey, we're running a tournament at like 4 o'clock. See you in the morning at the booth. Come back and play. It gets people really excited, and like you said too, people run with it online, like streamers and stuff. And so if the core is there, like people are gonna find a way to do it. But to grow, you do need the tools you mentioned. Yeah. So from a designer's perspective, though, you're really having the core like gameplay loop fun and just. So like a home for that is best.
That's some really good insight. Thank you very much to the two of you. So my next question is, when you're designing a game to go into an esports ecosystem, to what degree are developers, or should developers be considering the perspective of professional players or aspiring professional players or organizations, let's say, when trying to build up a game that potentially might have an esports ecosystem in the future?
Well, I personally don't believe a small studio can aim to develop a sports title from the go. I think it's of course you can, because you can choose whatever you want, but it's so risky that probably you shouldn't. But if we take an example of Valorant, Riot partnered with former, or even at the point still professional Counter-Strike players to get early that acute, sharp design of the gunplay ready for Valorant when Valorant was released. Was that with the intent of making a better game or esports? I cannot speak about that, but definitely helped. So you can collaborate with players, but if your intent is making a game that is super good in the competitive aspect of it, that's mostly where your intent should be. Like, that's what you should be striving to get, and esports will come from that or not, depending how much you support your community.
Yeah, I think these top players or people who end up becoming professionals, they're super important to talk with and engage to. They're some of the most people that are the most passionate about your game. I mean, so like you obviously want to be speaking with them. But something that's easy to get caught up in is, you mentioned in your keynote that they're going to be way better than you at the game, than the developers, and almost always they are. So you'll spend 4 years making a game or something, and then they'll be better in like 2 weeks. So they have valuable insight into the gameplay and how things work, but I think it's important to hear their feedback as a developer in a way that they're identifying a problem, but you shouldn't necessarily be taking the solution they say to heart. So they're going to tell you the problem and they're going to tell you the solution. And I think most of the time, from my experience, the designers, you guys do have some confidence because you have this design brain, and even if you're not as good as playing at them, there's a lot of times a better way to solve a problem that they've identified. But it's important, I think, to capture the issues, or not always that they're issues, right? But like points of the game from these top players, and then digest them and go through. So use them to talk to, but not necessarily design your whole game around, or you're going to be left with like something that's only for the top 1%, right? And it's not fun for everyone. So it's important not to let them drown out the whole base of the game, even though they're like going to be a really loud subgroup in an esport community.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. I myself, I work in a collegiate space, and so I see often a lot of people come and ask, hey, is this for people who are super competitive? And I think from my perspective, it's super important to strike that balance. I'd like to actually follow up on this topic. I know, Mr. Murilo, you mentioned it during your keynote that one of the things to keep in mind is making sure that players are engaged and can understand how they can get better at the game. So with that in mind, from a game developer's perspective, how do the two of you feel about the balance between making a game for competitive, but still keeping it open to casual players?
Yeah, it's a really, well, I guess it can be tough, but a lot of the things that competitive players enjoy, so a lot of these games are multiplayer games. So just in the sense of that identity for a game, people are going to be able to have fun with their friends as well. It's like you don't have to necessarily pound your head into like a ranked queue or something, right? So if the game is fun to, hey, you can queue up with friends, you have these tools, like you have lobbies, you have maybe some single player stuff like training modes, places for people to get better, that kind of stuff. I think that'll go a really long way.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's always going to be tough to create the challenge level for a player that has 1,000 hours in your game, while we're still keeping that accessible for someone that just started or has like couple days into your game. So when you're designing those systems, design principle that is easy to learn, hard to master, that's usually the learning curve gets exponentially higher the closer you go, like mechanically or even like on the number crunching level and etc. That can cater to that, but that's a problem without solution today. I think that every game tries to solve differently, to different degrees of success in both sides of the spectrum, but it's something that you have to keep in mind. You cannot create something that is going to just completely alienate part of your audience. The most vocal players that are engaged there for 1,000 hours. How can you just put them completely out of your mind? But also, how can you not care about the guy that's just starting and don't have that much time to play, but really passionate about your game and wants to play with their friends? So you have to design things for both. And of course, you can also offer different experiences for both in different parts of your game if you have the size of the company to develop those.
Yeah, exactly. You want your floor to be low to get in the door, but then there'd be a way for people to really experience that higher end too when they spend the time and get rewarded. So.
No, absolutely. I think that makes complete sense. Thank you for the two of your insight. I think my next question is more aimed and more open-ended just towards the industry of game development. So from the two of your experiences, what do you feel like are some topics that aspiring game developers should maybe do more research on or look more into in regards to esports and implementation into games?
That is a cool one. Most of when we're going to talk about esports, most of the things happen outside of your game, and most often outside of your control as a game dev. So that's what you should be taking a look at in your community, not only from the voices of your community or the influencers and the multipliers and etc., but you should be looking at what your community is perceiving your game as and deciding if that's the direction you want to grow your game towards or not. And this is going to come to esports eventually if your game is competitive. And if there's desire for that to be at that level of competition. And integration with partners that are not inside your organization is super important. So like recently, Discord released their SDK that's promising a lot of social features and integrations with game and etc. This is something that every game design right now should be looking at. Like the big part of the industry challenge right now is being found by. So how can we leverage that? And that's definitely part of esports. If you have a community that's very active on Discord and you're offering more tools to them, their lives is just better. They can thrive more. So you can capitalize on that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think as well, something that you can do that's really important at all levels of esports, like from grassroots to aspirational and professional, is to set use your studio and how you respond to things going on in the community to set a good example and like kind of build this culture that will let people like share and spread your game and be healthy, because you can't be everywhere, especially depending on the size of your team. And you're not going to be, it is going to be like third party stuff, people running these events. So you want to give them guidelines and things like that, but you also want to speak up when something needs to be said. I think it's powerful to step in like early as a small developer and say like, hey, we want this to be valued in our community, which is ideally something good. But yeah, so you want to stand up for that kind of stuff early, and that'll solve a lot of problems for you later, because people that have that you actually want to spend time with and people that want to form these kind of events will be interested in your game, and they'll see that it's someplace safe that they can spend time with and feel good about getting invested in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that community aspect you mentioned at the end there, it's really important, especially in larger scale games with big communities such as the ones that Aether Studios runs and the ones that Riot Games runs. So that's definitely some really good insight. I have a more broad question for the two of you. You two have a lot of development experience and a lot of management experience in kind of different game genres. When it comes to managing community and providing feedback updates on the state of the game, how do you feel that differs between different game genres or communities in your experience?
Ooh. I think not only is this question not only matters for genre, but the topic as well. Like when you engage with any community, just changing monetization stuff, no one is happy, right? And this part of, but the principle is the same. Aside from monetization to balance to new features, it's transparency. What is the intent? You give context to your players, they will advocate for you within the community because they understand what you're trying to achieve. That's how you build trust through transparency, to context. So you provide that to your community, and they will either go to battle for you or try to burn you down, depending on what you're doing. Really depends. I think for working from shooters to MOBA, I can say no community is the same. For sure, you can find something similar in every community, like advocates, folks that are not even playing the game but are still part of the community because they have like strong social tissue and etc. You can find those in any gaming community, but your strategy should serve your player at that point, right? So having a deep integration with your community, understanding your audience is how you communicate with them.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Huge. That I think just being transparent about why and what you're doing will let people advocate for you. Because when they understand where you're coming from, if they feel the same way, they can share that with other people. So it's really important. And I think the genre too, you just totally got to meet your players where they're at. Because like in a fighting game, someone's like, you can say like, hey, we made forward strong better. And some people want to know like, okay, now the knockback angle is this, and the hit stun modifier is this, and it lasts this many frames of like hit stun and this many frames of end lag. So like there's different levels. You want to make sure it's consumable by all levels. So ideally, like you do have it that it's understandable. Like, hey, A and B is better. And I know Riot always did a good job with that too, because they would have like the videos by Freak come out, and it's like this is what's changed, this is what's nerfed, this is what's buffed. But then. Yeah, if you are a community or a type of game that does really care about the details, yeah, give it to them also. Give them the big patch notes, let them get excited. I think just meeting where they're at is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of variation when it comes to community, as the two of you have mentioned. And it's always best to take a look at what the community is building, take a look at what the direction your game is going in, as you said, and really just take feedback from there and evaluate. This next question is more towards the game development end. At least in recent times, have you observed any trends in game development that you believe are beneficial or negative towards esports development? And if so, would you be open to speaking about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's no secret for everyone that the game industry right now is going through a crisis for some years. That definitely influences esports. Like esports is expensive by nature to build, and for a lot of these organizations that treat esports as marketing budget, that's the first place those orgs are cutting costs is on the marketing. So esports is one of the things. It's like it's cheaper to run ads than to have an esports scene. Like you see conversations like that happening, which is unfortunate because that's not necessarily true. When you build a fan of your game through esports, you're probably building a lifelong fan. Like a person that's, even if they don't play your game anymore, they keep coming back to talk about it and to advocate about it, and then consuming everything that you're still putting out there. So all of that is super connected, and it's one of the biggest challenges for esports within orgs is justifying your value. What is the ROI of esports? Is a question unanswered. So that's a trend that for esports is dangerous and possibly damaging for many scenarios. We're seeing even on big companies like just shrinking the schedules, like less investment on big events and etc. So that's definitely not great.
Yeah, I think while that is shrinking, something that is a positive trend that developers could take note of is probably these things like you mentioned, like the Discord integrations, and Twitch has a bunch of integrations. There's ways that people want to engage with the game that is going to help get your game out there if you at least do a little bit of groundwork with integrating that into your game. So it is like extra development time, but it can go really, really far and not be anywhere close to the budget of putting on like a production or an event, or even a lot cheaper than any of the marketing like ads you're going to do. So I think those integrations it's kind of trending because that content is fun. Like people love seeing streamers do stuff, but it's also really powerful.
Yeah, just taking back a minute, I think that is super, super important. On the base layer of that pyramid, we were never as structured as we are right now, with the many tools and just conversation happening across a lot of partners and helping that part of esports grow. A lot of the new games you're seeing already have established communities at launch because they're being working community before launch, and that's super powerful for esports scenes for sure.
One thing to add that's more of a fun answer, but I think you see a lot of the voice chat integrations nowadays, and those are really fun. That's a fun, like, trendy thing going on. But that also just is an easy way to build, like, make your game have really engaging content. Because anything multiplayer focused too is going to kind of have endless content because the players playing each other are making that content. So that's something to think about when you're even if your game is like primarily single player, some way for people to experience your game with friends. So that'll give you a lot longer legs and more reach, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you mentioned, this current marketing trend of using streamers as well, using other forms of media that have been propagated more in the last 5 to 10 years, is definitely a positive way to build up that base pyramid that you were discussing and describing, Mr. Murilo. One more question regarding game developers and esports professionals. Are there any things that you would like to share for esports professionals that would help game developers in creating a better game?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's once you have those core, like super skilled players into your ecosystem, getting them early into the design space so they can help, as you mentioned, like George mentioned pretty well, like helping define the problems of that change, but not necessarily the solutions for that problem, is super valid. They will be able to connect dots that you might be overlooking. And as any design process, just having more eyes on it help you go out of the tunnel that you would inevitably go into when you're designing something. And those players are great for that. It's like, and also providing them early helps them be more prepared for one that hits the live, right? Like we had examples of iterative process on Champions, on League, or new agents on Valorant, or other games as well, that before they were launched, the updates or the balance, they were actually changed because pro players saw how that could impact the core game experience, not even the championships, but the core game experience. And that is extremely powerful.
Yeah, they're going to be some of the most passionate people that are playing your game at all. So yeah, they're going to have a lot to say, and it's really good just to open that dialogue with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that about does it for the questions we have prepared today. I'd like to open the floor for a Q&A session for our audience to ask both of our esteemed guests any questions. So if you're in the audience, feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions, and we'll move on to the Q&A session. This is on the left there.
Yeah, so I had a question about game design and education within the game, teaching people how to play the game. In Murilo's presentation, I found it really interesting. You were mentioning how at the very fundamental levels, the competitive aspect. And so when people play the game, they have to know like how to get better if they lose and what's the path to getting better at the game. And I think, I have a fighting game background, and, you guys know in fighting games, a lot of stuff that's very unintuitive, and some of that unintuitive stuff is fundamental in winning against your opponent. For example, if you don't know anything about frames, then somebody who knows how to do frame trap is just going to kill you over and over and over and over. You're just going to get steamrolled. We've seen this in Dragon Ball FighterZ when the game came out, and it's just this moment where like there's the skill gap is just so great, and there's like, whoa, it's like very overwhelming, right? So I'm wondering, like, what is the at what point does the game dev have the responsibility to show how to get better at the game, with tutorials or learning modes, and obviously there's going to be training modes. And at what point is it up to the player to just look up content creators on like Get Good? And so there's kind of like a fine line, right? Like in Tekken, there's like nothing. It's like one of the most unintuitive games like ever. It's so complicated at the higher levels. We're trying to get good, but then some games have like really nice tutorials. And so I don't know if you guys had thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's really important for that to come from the developer, at least like something for their basics, like tutorialization. So, because at the end of the day, especially if I've talked to a few people here and they're like, we're about to start our first game or launch our first game. Like, you're going to be the only one, the main person advocating for your game. So you're going to get fans and players, but like you know the most information about the game, and it's your job to let people know the cool stuff, like how to play, what they're missing, like the crazy combos, like you said, or something like that. I don't think it definitely will happen as you get larger and larger and larger. Like, people will make those tutorial videos for you, but I think it's not that safe to just rely on someone else making that content. So I think it's important for the game, and it's important to keep people playing, and especially in a 1v1 game, like fighting games, where you can just get like obliterated 50 games in a row. You can't blame your bot lane or whatever. Like, well, I'm really good, but he's feeding. So yeah, in those kind of games, especially like single player focused fighting games, I think tutorials are really important and a path to get better.
Yeah, I think there's many things that are connected to the game that can help, like when we talk about tutorials outside of the game and etc. But on the core dev aspect, there's all the feedbacks you give the player. So like the effects you give when you hit a perfect hit versus a normal hit. Like, how do you conveying that information? What cues are you introducing so players know what's going to happen and can prepare and react in time? So all of those things have to be part of the design experience to a player that's interested in learning have at least the hooks to pull from. Like, oh, I heard this thing from this time and I didn't react to it in time.
Can I be a horrible person and add on to your answer?
Of course.
My one recommendation is, and I've been making games for 30 years now, so you want to have a tutorial, but you want to have a tutorial that matches up with the expectations of the majority of your audience. If you try and build in a tutorial for the masters of the game, for the pros, you're going to lose a huge chunk of your audience because they're just not going to understand it and feel bad about not being able to master that tutorial. Provide the information, just provide it outside of the game. So you may not have the community to build up that information, still build it, but build it inside YouTube videos or provide that information outside of the game. But inside the game, you want to make sure that you're providing a path that makes the most sense for your general consumer, not just for your pro players.
Exactly. Fully agree. You have to teach your players how to play the game, but not necessarily how to master it. Like, it's up to them to go into the mastery. It's a decision not every player will want to do, but if you introduce that as a part of the experience, they will feel compelled to, and they might not be able. It's just, there's so many things, there's like frame tracking and etc. Not everyone is able to do that. No matter if you want, just you might not be mechanically inclined enough to be able to do it. So you should not introduce as a part of the core experience of your game unless it's accessible enough.
Yes.
Yeah, so when it comes to building social systems within a game, how can you build certain social systems within a competitive game to kind of help that like esports and like competitive nature of the project?
Yeah, I love this one. It's one thing be able to play a match. It's a whole different thing be able to play a tournament inside the game. And the experience that comes from that, can be the decision for a player to be part of a competitive ecosystem or not. So like ranked systems and etc. Like, there's a difference between solo queues and party queues and etc. For many different reasons in balancing and etc. Some of them is like, yeah, were you truly a ranked player if you only play solo queue? But for other games, they have full tournament systems as part of the experience that you can go to a tournament. There are days for you to show up and play, etc. And there are players that only play the tournaments, and that's fantastic. So all those things are social tools because you're enabling players to form parties and play together, and you're enhancing competitiveness.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I would add to that might be depending on, sorry, might be depending on the size of your game and stuff. Just keep in mind that the more social features you add, just approaching this from a different angle, because what you said makes sense, but you have to have more moderation, and it's important not to just add this and not care about it, because you'll get kind of like a festering, like bad people can come in there, and it's really important to have like these community guidelines in place and a way to moderate this stuff. It's all systems you'll have to think about as a developer on the back end, like, okay, like how do I ban someone now, and how do I send them a message that stop saying this to people in chat, right? Like, so it's all not free to build, but it is really powerful because those kind of players that are involved in tournaments and that kind of stuff are super dedicated, and they're probably going to be a fan for a long time.
And if you're ever planning to go crossplay, be careful with social features, because there's a lot of, each platform has their own requirements of how everything is shown. And if you don't build it right, you have to rebuild it every single thing again once you start to go crossplay. That's a early decision into your product vision.
All right, help me to understand the player mindset of it. As a game director, approaching single-player cooperative esports and also multiplayer esports, what are the skills that a player is trying to gain? What are the desires of the player in both of those gameplay modes?
Ooh, interesting question. There's a lot of different needs and behaviors you can see on a player that is interested in esports as a player, not as an audience for esports. A lot of folks that love to watch, that not necessarily want to compete. But as a player that's interested in competing, there's sense of mastery. There's something very powerful in being the best player at what you do. There's nothing that gives you the same amount of achievement, and it's the journey. It's about the journey, not the destination most of the time. So it's the path to get there. But once you get there, it's keeping that crown. It's also super, super motivating for a lot of folks. But one of the behaviors, one of the needs that I see most of the players are engaging in the competition is validation. You're being validated by the community, and you're now this voice that is heard because of your skill level. There's a lot of things that are tied to psychological needs. There's a lot of things that are also sense of self-mastery. Like, you don't care about that, but you want to be the best because you want to prove to yourself that you can, like, to be the best version of yourself. So there's a lot of things that are more on this spectrum, which many things on game design are, but that's definitely something that I see very fairly often in many professional athletes.
I think something surprising about esports too is you normally picture that person who is like number one, and they have the dream of the crown, and it's all that aspirational psychological stuff. But it also really does. It does make a home for people that aren't necessarily number one. There's other ways to be involved. There's this whole ecosystem with tournament organizers and production people that want to stream the event, and people who want to make graphics around the event. People want to make highlight videos like of the players that are number one, right? So like, there's a lot of ways people can get involved in that greater community, and they also, feel that validation then, which is they have like a voice in the community, and then that helps them stay in there longer.
Yeah, sure. Personally, the first thing that I did when I joined the esports industry was opening ceremonies. And I was extremely passionate about bringing a fully digital game. How do I transfer that to real life in a way that is an art form? That was my fulfillment that I got from there. So in every profession on the ecosystem, there's definitely different fulfillment for players that are trying to grind for the audience that's watching. This can be just having a cool thing to watch together with friends, or something, or cheering for one team that you identify very strongly, or one athlete. But that's a lot of different spectrums for sure. And it's a super interesting exercise to try to explore all these needs and behaviors of this audience and how to try to fulfill them.
Oh, yes.
Question real quick. Something that I've noticed a lot with games, especially with fighting games, is there's kind of towing that line between games where it's difficult enough that you feel it's competitive and you want to improve versus that barrier of entry where it's too difficult and you want to then give up. How do you sort of balance that so that you can then motivate new players to be inspired to learn and improve at the game and master it versus trying to make it not so difficult that they don't want to play it anymore?
A lot of people wish they knew. I'm kind of kidding. But yeah, I think it is important to make sure some of the stuff we talked about earlier, like that your skill floor is low enough that people can get involved, and like fighters did a lot with like the one button combos for that, right? Fighting games in particular are really hard with this problem. So yeah, this is another reason though why esports is important, because it's a reason to stick around in the game that isn't necessarily tying up all the person's self-worth to their win-loss ratio. So if you can get them involved in esports and the community, they'll play with their friends. They might still play like rank and stuff like that. But if they're not that good, it's another reason. It's like rewarding for them to still play and stick around.
Yeah, I firmly believe that as well. And I also think that it's an art form by itself. It's like getting that sense, getting to the polished level where the entry barrier is not that high, but it's still challenging and etc. You're not gonna get right the first time. There's a lot of iteration. That's like testing and testing and testing and getting more eyes and submitting to your audience and getting their feedback and integrating that. There's no other way of doing it if you try to do it just by yourself. It's like, I get this thing. It will probably design the game for yourself and not necessarily for an audience. So getting access and testing is how you make it better, and you get to that very polished level.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sorry, just one more thing to add on that, because like even a closed beta or something is really important, because people are going to rack up 2,000 hours on a weekend, and it's more than you spent years developing. So scenarios you've never seen and all that kind of stuff, like, yeah, getting it in players' hands will let you balance that. Yeah. And hopefully get to that perfect point.
We have another question over here.
This is more of a follow-up to that, actually, that mention. It's another thing I think that's really valuable as a developer is also the escalation of difficulty, making sure your difficulty scales up in a way that's organic so that people have the time to kind of learn and develop their skill set as they play. So not pushing the game to be super difficult right at the start, and giving the opportunity for your players to actually learn the bases of the game through ranked systems. As a great example, like League of Legends, where you start at bronze, silver, or whatever, and that way you are playing with people at an equal skill level instead of playing with people who are much better than you at the game, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. Like the progression and of the player journey is also something that is extremely hard to get right. And as George said, players, once you put on the hands of players, collectively they will, in the first weekend, have way more hours than your whole dev team together playing that game, and they will find things that you never thought were in the game. Combos or exploits and etc. It's a matter of getting that right, and especially with progression. Like we've seen games that on first weekend, they get day 0 patches because, or day 1 patches or day 2 patches because on the first weekend someone found a way of getting super fast throughout the journey that was not intended by the design. Is it a mistake from the design team, or is it just part of making games? It's more just part of making games. There's unless you have 5 years to develop a game, which nowadays is not much more of the norm, it's going to be very hard for you to have the same hours that your core audience is going to have on the first day of testing.
We have a question in the back.
I just had a question about, like, at what point when you're developing are you looking at things like your ESRB ratings and keeping your games accessible to certain students? Somebody again who's very focused on the K-12 space. Here in Canada, we have very specific data laws around data retention for somebody who's under the age of 13, and that's limited some of the titles that we can offer because of the ways that some devs have worked with different publishers and have required different data collected. So at what point do you guys can make those considerations in your development cycle, and having a good game versus making sure everybody can play your game? At what point do those conversations happen?
Well, going to get a little bit more technical into the game development pipeline. So usually those conversations will happen at the very beginning when you're trying to define what your thesis is. What's my core audience? If your core audience is on that space, you should already be having those conversations like, what are the requirements that I have to be part of the game that I cannot overlook? It's the same if you define that your game is going to be on a platform. I want to have this on PlayStation. What do I need to comply when I go to certification? I guarantee that. So the very early beginning, you start listening, you start creating this risk assessment, but it really gets acted on when you get into production. So after you have your vertical slice, you have your game approved to go into full production, you start solving those issues more broadly, but you have to have them aware, otherwise you're creating a version of the game that might never actually leave production because you're not fulfilling the base criteria that is be playable by the core audience that I'm targeting to.
Yeah, the good thing, all those guidelines are very clear and easy to find. The sneaky one that you mentioned, I think, is the data privacy stuff. Especially, I'm from the U.S. and so we have more lax laws. You can just give your information to whoever, but which is not good. But other countries, especially Europe, is very strict. So our games there and other games that are global and stuff, they really, you have to take on ownership and safeguard of this data, and especially when you're working with publishers too, they are going to want to market the game, and that's going to want to involve talking to other companies that might be sharing this stuff in a way that's not kosher with different organizations, or even the players' appetites for what's getting shared. So that one is a really good one to bring up. I don't think there's much you can do to plan around it. It's just a decision you have to make at the time. Whereas for the rating, you're the artist, you have the vision, you can decide the rating early on. Am I putting blood splatter in, or is it a puff cloud? Right? That's, yeah.
Yes, another question in the back.
As you are scaling your audience of either an esport or a game, we're going to call it both, you're also likely running into creators and organizations that want to work with you. How do you, as a game designer, balance the partnership versus, I'm going to let this happen organically, with what your creators or organizations are able to do within your title, be it giving them options to access your players in-game, or be it licensing or giving them some amount of marketing spend themselves to host events? What does that look like from both of your perspectives?
Yeah, partnerships are, I think, one of the things that we just talked about, what are the legal limitations you are bound when you define your audience, is also comes with what partnerships you can have. I have a game for 12 or younger audience. I cannot have a casino partnership tied to it. For the most likely, this will be frowned upon in any region. So there's limitations that you have to consider. Usually it doesn't fall into the core dev game team to be part of those conversations. They're mostly handled by publishers, when you're on that scale. And of course, there's ramifications to the dev team when it's part of this. Yes, we approve and we want to move forward with this partnership. This is the part of the dev team has to provide for that partnership to go. I think one case is when Red Bull started sponsoring League of Legends Championship. They had a Red Bull can as part of one of the cosmetics capsules on the game. That was developed by the dev team, but that was not signed by the dev team. That all the conversation was handled by on a publishing executive level, and really comes to what is the vision for the growth. You can let the game grow organically, but you shouldn't. You should have a strong vision of what the direction I want this community to grow, and which kind of partners I want to bring into this ecosystem. It's gonna always be a hard decision because you have to balance financials with what is the best thing for your vision. So you're gonna bring some brands that are 100% aligned, some that are not 100% but majority aligned, so you feel comfortable bringing them in and having this conversation being very clear on expectations for both sides. So it's going to create a successful partnership, but you have to have a strong vision where your community is growing to decide if you a partnership. A company like Riot receives way more proposals of sponsorship and partnership that they are willing to let League of Legends brand be part of. I expect it should be also reality that. But definitely, there's a lot of more people interested that not necessarily is what they want for their IP. And this is just part of when you're an IP owner is, I'm okay collaborating with Disney, most likely. I'm okay collaborating with this guy that never did anything on this ecosystem and doesn't have any background, probably not. So it's a business evaluation first before it gets into the core game dev aspect of it.
Yeah, and I'll speak from a smaller team's perspective that it's the same things you have to think about, but you're the one at the end of the day that's doing it. It's not a separate team. So you have to juggle all this. And yeah, you want to be socially responsible with what your brand is being tied to. This is really important. It's not just something to say, oh yeah, it's going to get in front of more people, right? Like, think about now what you're associated with in the game you're building, especially if you're starting like a newer game. So that's really important. I think also when you're a smaller team, just making sure that you're accessible and have ways for other people, partners, to empower themselves will go a long way. Like if you'll spend work maybe building a resource kit or building guidelines or building this kind of stuff, but things that can work for you in the long run are really powerful, because then you're spending less time talking when you need to be developing if you're a small team. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just going to take one more question. One more person in the back.
What kind of considerations go into the decisions on whether or not to expose an API? Coming from the perspective of a community-led organization that uses a game's API for essentially our entire business model. And I know content creators and stuff like that. And I guess to follow on that, what is as game designers, your professional and personal opinions on data mining?
Nice question. I really like this one. When you're building APIs, I think there's one question that's very often is, can I afford this? And it's not only exposing API or not, but you probably have the same engineer that could be making your server more responsive or working on an internal system that will just get the development pipeline faster and etc. Will I prioritize an API for whatever function it is that is exposed? And when you decide to expose it, there's so many security things that you have to consider. I would never expose an API that's directly tied to the game server and can be easily attacked and DDoSed. It's massively just causing the game to constantly be offline because there's this one streamer that we don't like and is playing right now, so let's attack the game. So stuff like that is very dangerous when you decide to expose APIs. And I personally think they have to, and all the best engineers that I work with, they bring that into consideration when the work is started. As we often say, things doesn't come from free, and guaranteeing that your API is not only going to be exposed, but it's not going to make your game worse by being open and exposed is super important. Limiting the keys and having the maximum amount of access. It's open, but it's not publicly available. There's plenty of stuff you can do, and all of that need to come in consideration. But once again, has to come from a vision of what this tool is serving for, not only API for an API, but like what's the goal of having this API? What do I want to, as a game, to get out of it? It's like I want to have more tournaments, therefore, that's the goal of this API, and those are the folks that I should be giving access to. And all the process comes from that. Personally, for data mining, asking your question, I love it. I think it's so fun to see players finding some stuff in the depths of your game that you're never gonna ship and are mostly crimes. Not from a legal perspective, crimes from a design perspective. I just think it's fun. I think it's super nice to see your community that engaged, to go that level of interesting, to see what are the things that are there but might never come to see the light of day.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overhead with an API, so you're probably going to only see that at places that have like the resources to do that, like not only the engineering, but also that gets back into then your data management and your server costs and things like that. A lot of smaller games aren't even going to have their own like be server-based stuff. So yeah, you can do a lot of cool things and you can build all these amazing websites and things off it, but I think it's hard to plan early in development. Kind of see it as like an add-on. But yeah, I also think data mining is fun and people do that all the time. You just have to make sure as a developer that you are aware that people are going to get in under the hood, kind of like no matter what you do. So if you really want something to be secret, you have to make sure it's not in a public build, the build that no one gets their hands on.
And Easter eggs on data mining are super cool, and I think more devs should do that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that is it for our Q&A session today. Thank you all for coming, and of course, thank you to our guests for speaking. You guys gave some excellent insights, and I think the audience really appreciated that. If we could get a round of applause for our two guests.
Thank you.
Thank you.